Hi there, welcome to this build of a really nice vintage model, the Gladiator, which first appeared in Air Trails in March 1941. And we're building this from a great set of plans that you can download from the Outer Zone website, and it's a free site, really excellent set of plans. Now, we've got the wings built, which are a really nice tip dihedral wing with a really broad chord, lovely vintage look. And now we're working on the fuselage. In the last video, we did some of the preparation we needed to do before we can start to pull these fuselage sides together, which is what we're going to do in this video. We're going to build the two fuselage sides. Now, we've got the longerons done. These are the top ones, which are lovely and straight, and we pre-formed the longerons for the underside, and you can see they've got a lovely sweeping curve on them there, and that will allow us to build the belly of the fuselage without having a huge amount of tension in it and risk breaking them, because these are all hard 1/4 inch square balsa, and if we bend these, chances are they'll snap. So we pre-formed these, we just put a little bit of a curve in them, like I say in the last video. Well worth going back and having a look at that if you haven't seen it, because it's a really simple technique just to, like I say, get a little bit of a curve in something. So we've got those, we've got the cheeks, so really we're all ready to start building. And I've got the plans pinned down on my cork building board, and I've got some like clear sandwich wrap, PVC wrap that's over the top of that, just so we don't stick to the plans. So we need to start getting this pinned out, so we'll have a closer look now. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is pin down these two longerons, these 1/4 inch square hard balsa longerons, and I'm not going to pin through the balsa. I'm going to be using blocks like I've got here to push against the sides. I don't really like putting pins through balsa. I know it doesn't really weaken it, but it's just I don't like doing it essentially. And if you put it against the side of the balsa, then you end up with little dents in it, which I don't like either. So I'm going to be using these blocks, and I'm going to make sure that the blocks are tall enough so that we can get two lots of 1/4 inch on there, so they need to be at least 1/2 inch high, because we're going to build the one side and then the second on top of it. Now, to get this longeron on the top, I'm going to use this 1 meter steel rule to make sure that I get it absolutely straight. We want to get this fuselage nice and straight, and this top longeron is going to be the basis of that. These blocks of balsa we obviously need to pin in, but we need to make sure that they're avoiding the uprights and diagonals that we're subsequently going to add to this. Now, it's interesting, this design, because it's, if I just move that, it's a 57 inch long fuselage, so it's really long, and yet the CG is here. So you can see there's very little at the front of this, but there's a huge amount of balsa behind. So we need to be really mindful of any weight we put back here, because we are going to pay for it with some lead up the nose, I'm sure we are. Now, on the plans it says this is hard balsa from this upright forward, which is fine, and then from this diagonal going back we need to select some really nice light stuff, and like I say, limit the amount of weight that we add at the back here. So I will start to get this pinned down, and once we've got the longerons in place, we'll have a look at what we're going to do next. Oh, and just to say, I've got these two pieces of spruce here which add as bearers for the engine. There is more hardwood to go in, it's not just these, but these are left over from the wing spars that were cut off the end, and the length is ideal, and I've cut those to size. But I'll get these pinned out now. Right, I've got this all pinned out now, these longerons, and I've put on the top piece which supports the wing as well, the top of the cabin. And what I'm going to do is work just on this hard cabin section here, or hard balsa cabin section, and then I'll sort out my soft balsa and just do the rest of it. Now the first thing I'm going to do is just get some epoxy, and I'm just going to epoxy that brace, that hardwood brace there. And as I said, there is some hardwood that goes on the inside which will hold the engine, but this is just to stiffen up this front area. So I'm going to get that done, and then I'm going to start cutting these uprights and diagonals. And you can see I've done one here. Now building up something like this is a fairly easy process, I suppose. You just cut the diagonals and the uprights and glue them in. I'm going to be gluing them in with some thin CA, but it isn't that easy really, because we need to make sure that we get the angles correct on these diagonals, and even on the uprights we need to make sure that we get those cuts nice and square. See, I've got a couple of pieces cut here. I mean, they're not glued in, they're just held there temporary at the moment, and I'll glue them in a minute. But what I'm going to do to cut these is I'm going to mark them up. I'm going to hold the piece of balsa over the top. I'm going to just mark across there with a pencil line as accurately as I can, and again there. And now we have the two cuts, but hopefully I'm going to cut this slightly oversized, and what I've got here slightly oversized so I can then sand it down and make sure it fits, rather than cutting it what I think is correct size and ending it with it sloppy. Now we can use a mitre like this for cutting some of the square angles, the 90-degree angles, but where we've got them at an angle we can't use our mitre block quite as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this piece of wood here. It's just a piece of plywood with a bit of wood on, and I know that there is a square angle, 90-degree angle should I say. So I'm just going to put my piece of balsa in, and I'm going to hold my razor saw at the correct angle to saw along that line, and I'm going to use the upright of this piece of wood to make sure that my saw is 90 degrees to the table and to the balsa, so I get a nice square cut. So you can do this with a mitre saw, but I quite like using wood to cut against rather than the aluminium, which must affect your saw over time. So now we will do this other end. Like I say, I'm cutting this very slightly generously so that we can then sand it down to fit. There we go. Now if we look at those ends, they look nice and square. I mean, getting these right can be a real pain sometimes, or it can take just a little bit of sanding. Now you can see that is too long, because that will not go all the way up to mark up with those lines, which is fine, that's how I wanted it. So now I've got my sanding stick. I'm going to hold my bit of balsa on the bench. I'm going to hold the sanding stick square with the table, or 90 degrees to the table, and just give that a very gentle sand. That's quite fine paper, so we're not taking off a huge amount with that. And we can see that's almost there, but it's pushing up the longer on. So we don't want to push the longer on up, we want to have it just fitting snugly. So take a bit more off. And this is what takes the time with a build-up, a stick build-up like this. Now that's almost there, but actually the angle is changing a little bit as it's going up. So we just need to keep doing this until we get it right. And at the end of the day, if we get it wrong and it ends up too sloppy, we can just move it and use it for here or somewhere else. And obviously it'll need cutting, but there we go. Now that fits there quite nicely. So we've got 3 done, and what I'm going to do now is get the rest of this central section done, the hardwood, and I'll get this epoxied on, and then we'll have a look at doing the softer balsa. Okay, well, a bit of an update now. I've got all of the wood in here, the hard balsa wood that is, which is the 1/4 inch square. So that is all nicely done now, and I have put in a piece of soft here, and as I said earlier, all of these diagonals going right back to the tail now are going to be softwood. Now I've started to do some of these gussets, and I've put in a couple of gussets here and here, and I've got this one to glue in there, and these are all hardwood as well. And it's really important that when we put these gussets in, we notice the direction of the grain on the plan, and the grain always comes acrossways like this, not that way. If it's going that way, it could just split, so we need to have the grain as shown on the plans. So I'll stick that in a minute, and I mean these here, I'll stick them in and I'll sand them once I've done with a round sanding stick. And we mustn't forget that these are structural. They're not just for, you know, because it looks good, but they are to hold that, that structure. So that will get glued onto there. It's interesting that, I mean, there's a few things on the plan here, like we've got these stringers there, we've got a stringer on the bottom, we've got a stringer down the side, and it made me realise that you need to put a hole here for the dowel for the elastic band through there. But once we get the stringer on, which if I just show what that's going to look like, it's going to look a bit like that. Then that is going to be set back from the covering film. So at some point we're going to need to build that up so we don't just plunge a hole in the covering film. We've actually got the film secured on something so it doesn't rip. But I hadn't thought about that or noticed that before, but it's these things that you notice when you're building and thinking about sort of what you're doing. Now I've got this cheap piece I'm about to glue in here, and I thought I'd just show you another use for my my right angled cutting block. Right, well this is my 90-degree block which I've been using to cut the angles on this 1/4 inch square, but I've also been using it for sanding. And I've got this cheek, and I just want to make sure before I glue it onto the front of the fuselage side, I want to make sure this edge is nice and straight but also nice and square. So I'm just holding that up against that like that, holding it nice and rigid, and then we can just go along gently like that. And I know that that is sanding that lovely and straight and also lovely and square. So now that should fit really nice against the front of the against the front of the fuselage side. So now we've got a nice square edge, and that will butt up against there really nicely and glue really well. So I'll get that done. Right, well I'll get these gussets finished around the window, and then we'll get the rest of the this fuselage side finished. Right, well it's really good to get this fuselage side finished, and in all intents and purposes it's ready to come off the board. But we don't want to do that just yet. We're going to use it as a pattern to build the second fuselage side on top of it so that we get an identical pair. I think much better than taking it off and then using the plans again. So we've still got all of the blocks that we used to hold the two long runs in place, and also the top of the cabin here, although I may have to add the odd additional block. So we're just going to slot this in, but before we do it, I've got lots of little bits of plastic that I'm going to place over the joints, or where the joints are going to be on this new one, so that when we, let's just slot this in, so that when we start gluing it, we're not actually going to glue the second side to the first side, because let's face it, the last thing we want to do is glue them together, because we'll never get them apart, and if we do, it's going to be a little bit tricky. So I've got a piece of plastic in there. I'm going to get a few more and just thread them, or just tuck them under, and then we can start building this fuselage side. So we'll come back and have a look when I've got this second side done. Right, well I've now got this second fuselage side finished, and we're ready to take these off the building board and see what they look like, and hopefully they haven't stuck together, or I haven't stuck them together. And it's interesting because this is probably the biggest fuselage I've ever built, and at the same time, something I'm not filming is the smallest fuselage I've ever built. This is a little free flight indoor model that I'm making. So we'll get that out the way nice and safely, and let's start to get this off the building board. I have removed some of the blocks and some of the pins already, and just because they were in the way as I was gluing some of these diagonals in place. Now, I would have got this finished a little bit earlier than I did, but the weather was really nice yesterday, so everything in the workshop stopped, as it should do on a good sunny calm day. We need to make the most of our flying days, particularly when you live on a small windy island, which the UK is, I guess. So anyway, let's get this sorted. Right, so the last few pins are coming out now, and we'll see what this looks like. Got all the blocks out of the way, and now hopefully this should just lift off. Yes, lovely. And you can see all the little bits of plastic glistening on here, and some of them stuck on where they've been just protecting the two sides from being glued together, but they're coming off really nicely. And just get these off. Well, what I will do is I'll leave those on and just actually, let's get that big piece off. We'll get the second side up off the table. Right, well, I've now got these two absolutely fabulous fuselage sides off the building board, and don't they look great? I'm really excited about building this this fuselage. So what we've got to do now is just 3 jobs, I think. We've got to just trim the ends where we left them a little bit longer. I'll leave the bit on the front of the cabin until I know exactly where the front of the wings is coming to and how we're going to do that. So that will probably be a late stage job. The other job, 2 jobs, is one to sand the sides, and we don't want to go mad on that, we just want to get any high spots off. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to clamp them together like that, and what we'll do is we'll just, and I'll just quickly do this, we'll just put some clamps like that at strategic places, one on the front, and then we can just go around and make sure that everything is absolutely identical. To be honest, these feel really nice, and it hardly seems necessary except maybe just on that front, because I can't feel any differences just holding them together. But that's one thing we need to check and get right before we, or ensure it's right before we glue them together. So to sand the sides, I've got one of my flat sanding sticks, and I'm just going to rub this down like this. I'm going to go both ways, but what we can't do is go side to side, because it just won't take it. We're just going to break something. So we just need to gently go down the sides. And it's important to remember that we're not going to actually have any covering on these fuselage sides, because we've got stringers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the turtle deck, which actually lift the covering away from these sides. So they don't need to be perfect, but obviously we'll just get off any high spots from the glue or anything like that. So I'll get these done and then we'll have a final look. Right, well, we now have our 2 finished fuselage sides, and I am really quite excited actually to get on and get these built up into a fuselage. Now you can see I've even done the bits around the windows. I've got a bit of old domestic waste pipe here, which I glued on some sandpaper. I made this up a few weeks ago, but I can't remember what I made it up for. But it's ideal for doing these window holes, just getting those curves, and then I'll finish them off with something a little bit smoother. But the outsides are sanded perfectly now, and the sides are lovely and smooth. So in all intents and purposes, we have two identical fuselage sides. And all of a sudden the workshop seems just a little bit smaller. So anyway, I'm going to draw this video to a close now, and in the next video we're going to be pulling these together to make up the basic fuselage. So please, I hope you've enjoyed this, but please come back and see how we get on in putting this fuselage together, because I think it's going to look pretty good. I'm quite excited about getting on with it. Anyway, thanks very much for watching.